Greetings, ke Dr Tshepo Moloi, ke le kgolokwe le kotswana, ke hlaba kgogo ka lemao ke ise ko moreneng ke re morena ke tlhabile. I greet myself and I introduce myself in this way to you because we are interested in these dialogues that we're going to be sharing on this platform. We're interested in the whole contestation and ideology of what today we understand as knowledge. Others may say it's mainstream knowledge, others may say it's Western-centric knowledge, others may say it's colonized knowledge. The point is we are interested in the project of knowledge, how what we have come to be taught has been defined and categorized as a particular form of knowledge. So to understand this, we must begin at the beginning. And to do this, we must appreciate that the subject of history has been dictated to, has been authored, has been narrated predominantly by so-called colonial authors. If we really want to be basic and unproblematic, we might join the mainstream critique of voices that say white scholars or European scholars are the ones who've written a lot of what we refer to as our history textbooks and our historical narratives, whether in the form of books, documentaries, monographs. The point is it is hardly our local people, because we are told that writing, which is really texture, which is what we find in texts, textbooks, is really a practice that was started by the white man when he arrives in Africa. Right, and this is a narrative and a mainstream argument that has been advanced for the longest of time. So those that go against this basically give us the history of Egypt, and they advance the argument that go into what in this side of southern Africa is called the Khoisan people, in terms of the rock art paintings that they did in the hills and the caves where they used to stay. And then of course there are a lot of Wits University has got what is called an Origins Center. If you add the Origins Center and what you see there in terms of prehistoric art, in terms of the pioneering human beings to walk the earth, and also if you go to what is called the cradle of humankind in the West Rand, and again, they continue what the Origins Center is talking about at Wits, about the earliest Africans or the earliest humans to walk the earth could be found in the areas such as the cradle of humankind. And of course, through the anthropologists and through the paleoscientologists or paleoscience scientists, we then learn that other areas as well, like in East Africa, in Sudan, as well as in Ethiopia, there are advances and skulls and bones that have been found. But I go back to this history because if it is agreed that the first human beings, Australopithecus africanus, that family of the human being, in terms of having been traced using paleosciences, anthropology, physics, chemistry, we then are to follow the narrative that says then it was what today are referred to as black people, who are the real primates of the human being family. And these black people's earliest form of writing was expressed through these rock forms or rock art. And we see antelopes, we see the eland, which was really the animal that they say they, not only did they eat it, but they really revered it in terms of their culture and their ancestral worship. And so we follow them and we say, so that would be the first form of writing. Now we know a later term comes to us called hieroglyphics. And we know that with Egypt in mind, we also think about the Chinese. So this is a form of expression of writing that came about, which again the Greeks want to come into the conversation when this word is being used. And it is said that it's the earliest form of what would be a precursor to what today we know as the alphabets. And of course, because I'm also a colonial product, I'm giving this history using the colonial language of English. And so the alphabets in this case would be what has come to be known as your typical A, B, C, D, up to Z. But we know through the different linguistics, through the different languages across the world of different people, we know that English is just but one language. And the spellings and the alphabets of those other languages are certainly not your A, B, C, D, up to Z. Respective languages have their own letters and therefore, must be recognized for having their own linguistic phrases and terminologies. But because we've been colonized, us, particularly in this side of the world, by us in this case, I mean black people, this side of the world, I'm specific to say I am talking to you in a context of South Africa as a so-called black South African. Although these are social constructs, there is no such identity, including the very name of South Africa. All these are modern terms that we use so that we can understand each other. But in reality, if you interrogate these terms, they do not exist. There is no such a person that can say, I'm a South African, because you can never be defined as a geographical location in the map. Okay, that is, so in other words, every time you say South African, you must accept the fact that you actually have not yet said anything. You still need to continue and expand, right? So again, I was always making the point that in Africa, so-called Africans use this concept and this terminology to identify themselves as a particular group in the world. But even that concept is equally problematic, because in all our languages throughout the continent of Africa and beyond, there is no such term as Africa. Regardless whether you're in the north of Africa, whether in the east, you're in the west, or you're in the south. And yet, ironically, we all embrace ourselves as this term that is foreign to our linguistic origins. And this is part of the thinking that shows like this and platforms like this want you to actually start to realize how abnormal we are in terms of our language, our phrases, our identity, and how we actually distinguish one another. And so all of this is referring to the Knowledge Project. We are products of the knowledge that has been indoctrinated into our lives. The minute we enter into an academic institution, which is nothing more than a Western-centric place of learning, we get taught the Western ways of knowing, whether it is mathematics, whether it is English, whether it is geography, regardless of what the subject is. From the day you enter crèche and you start hitting the different levels, grade 1, grade 2, standard 1, standard 2, all the way up to grade 12. And then you could progress into tertiary, right? Your undergraduate years, your postgraduate years, all the way up to your doctoral stage, and then beyond when you go into a level called postdoc research fellowship, and then beyond to professorship. This very model and this very trajectory that I've just outlined here is totally foreign to our ancestors as black people in Africa. we had our own ways and forms of knowing. And so the knowledge project, as we speak about it today, is problematized in a sense that it is a knowledge project that is hegemonic because it is a Western construct. And we know today that to be relevant, we are told to get these Western-centric training that are going to give us papers as proof of certification that we are educated. Yet that is all that is. We are certificated. Being certificated does not mean you are educated. There is a distinction to be made. And so the education that we have is really the Western-centric indoctrination that is now hegemonic. Hegemonic in a sense that it is now the predominant education. And so when you say knowledge, everybody is thinking about one form of knowledge, which is the Western-centric knowledge. Yet, as we strive and we raise the argument of decolonization, we are actually interested in decolonizing knowledge. And so if we understand this, we then understand that this one form of knowledge of Western-centric, Eurocentric knowledge is just one. There are other forms of knowledges that need to equally be respected alongside this Western-centric knowledge. In this case, one can say African knowledge or Afrocentric knowledge, and in our case, because we have our own forms of what we refer to as knowledge that is yet to be recognized in the mainstream. In fact, we don't even want to be recognized by the mainstream because because when we do that, we are playing into their tune that they need to know us, they need to be familiar with us, and therefore this is how they will embrace us and accept us and include us in their so-called degrees. And that is not the game we want to play. We're not begging to be included. Whether we like it or not, our form of knowledge exists. It is our duty to acknowledge it and to make sure we actually prioritize it in the same way that we are undergoing this colonial knowledge. So, to bring this point home, we then need to go into a subject called philosophy. Because philosophy is the mother of all the subjects that have now been packaged and being presented and being taught into different degrees, degrees which are housed in different faculties in our various institutions and mainstream universities in South Africa and beyond in the continent. Philosophy, if we are to define it, really is a lover of wisdom. So it is a student who is interested in acquiring wisdom. So they are a lover of wisdom. And when I introduce philosophy to my students in the lecture hall, I always take a chalk and I emphasize every time I say the word think. So I give them a definition that goes something along these lines. Philosophy is the discipline that teaches you about thinking, about the way that you think, about the things that you think about, and the way in which you think about the things that you think about. Pause. If you are to replay what I've just said, and you count the amount of times the word think has been said, so you can therefore then define philosophy as basically the discipline where thinking is being engaged, is being taught, and explaining and engaging why we think about the things that we think about. Now, do not confuse it with psychology, because psychology is really the study of the brain and how the brain works and the things that you're thinking about, which really can assist us to get to a diagnosis of what your problem is. Philosophy is not the biological emphasis of what's going on in your brain. Philosophy is the metaphysical. So even in the field of philosophy, we have the physical and the metaphysical. And the physical is, of course, what meets the eye. The metaphysical is the abstract things that we think about that really then influence how we behave, how we move, how we engage, and basically how we have attitudes towards whatever subjects are brought before us. So, mainstream discourse teaches us that philosophy started in Greece. And so we are told that the field of philosophy is a Western field because the Greeks are claiming to own it. They give us their founding fathers, Socrates, followed by his student Aristotle, followed by another student, Plato. And they go on in this way. And what they've done over the years is convince anyone who comes to the discipline of philosophy that philosophy is a Greek discipline. It comes from the West in the form of the Greeks, which is false. We have had enough of our critical philosophical scholars who have been rebutting this argument, and they have advanced the argument of Egypt. And they've said, all these people that are being advanced as fathers of any philosophical doctrine were actually students in Egypt. Pythagoras was a student in Egypt. He learned his mathematics and his geometry in Egypt. And he came back to Greece and in Athens. And today, in mathematics, we're told about the Pythagoras' theorem, as if it was originally his, and yet it's a bastardization. He got it from Africa, specifically Egypt. And we can go on in these examples in this way, where we are told so many things are given to these Greek names, and we're told these are the fathers. Therefore, these are the thinkers that have come up with these things, whether it's concepts, whether it's theories, whether it's doctrines. And yet, they got them from Egypt, which is in Africa. So we need to be alive to indoctrination. We need to be alive to the fact that scholarship is a contested domain. Scholarship is highly commercialized, and it has been embedded in us now that the more you are educated, in fact, abroad, you are better educated than your own kinfolk that are in your respective localities, whether it's in South Africa or the rest of the other African countries. You are always going to be compared with those that went to Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, and you will be told that they are more educated than you, or because they come from so-called Ivy League institutions. You will be told that they have much more value than you, who studied at the University of Venda, University of Zululand, University of Tefluop, or Botswana, and of course, I use these homeland universities intentionally because if you went to University of Cape Town and you went to University of Witwatersrand, Wits, and you went to Rhodes University, University of Pretoria, and now University of KwaZulu-Natal, you are still respected as your degree is worth the salt, in which your paper has been written and your name has been signed. And meaning, students who have gone to those universities feel they got a better education than those who went to the black universities, so-called black universities, which is laughable. But this is precisely what Western education has done. We are each other's enemies. We are consistently competing. I mean, if we understand education to be something that is supposed to better you, something that is supposed to assist you to be relevant to your society, assist your society to grow, it is laughable when you think, actually, it's being used as a tool to distinguish us in terms of levels, that this one is better educated than that one. Therefore, we will look at and listen and take more interest to this one, regardless of your skin color. So even if you come with a racial argument, I mean, a black graduate from UCT and a black graduate from University of Venda, coming from the same village, Makado, will not be treated the same by their very own Venda people, forget other people. Precisely because that is how the academic institution, that is the violence in which it has been built on. And so that we don't lose our point on philosophy, over the years, we have then therefore come to be interested in South Africa into, is there such a thing as an African philosophy? In South Africa, who are the South African scholars that basically we can talk and refer to as South African philosophies? Are they there that are black? Is it strictly the white South Africans who can be referred to as this? And so we've been watching and growing and learning, and we've taken interest in this. And so the first answer, to answer this question, we have to talk to the very idea of why, when we speak about a philosophy from Africa, we have to put a prefix and say African philosophy. Why can't it be the way we just say when we speak in a Western discourse, philosophy? Why can't it just be philosophy? Why does it have to have a prefix to say African philosophy? Already here, we have a problem. Because you are now suggesting that it actually is different to mainstream philosophy. So this is a particular philosophy. And if we remember my earlier definition, if philosophy is really the discipline of thinking and thinking about why we think about the things that we think about, why then would you put a prefix to a thinking practice that is taking place regardless where in the geographic location of the world? Why would you put a prefix? Because it's thought is thought. Thought is global. It's international, right? It doesn't have a geography. And here now in the discipline, we are placing geography. We are saying African. So already we have a problem with this. But let's move with this problematic categorization of African philosophy. We find the scholars in this discourse, just like scholars in the Western philosophy, are in arguments and are at pains to really argue that there has always been an African philosophy, or thinking has always existed in Africa. And of course now, because we intellectualize the discipline, there has been schools of thought that have been introduced, and for the purposes of this first episode, I do not want to go into them so that I don't lose your attention, but we will get into the different schools of thought and the different scholars that lead the different schools of thought within the context of African philosophy. But what is important for the purposes of this opening lecture is that certainly we do eventually have what may be referred to as South African philosophers, both black and white. And we will also go into details about who are those and go into some of their works so that we can actually grow our conversation, our discourse in the next episode. Thank you very much.